Tony Pollard steps in. It's a contract year, might not be back next year. Tell me a little bit more about the splits between him with and without Zeke Elliott.
Yeah, so he's played a total of 10 games without Ezekiel Elliott in his career and has an 86.6 passer rating with 2,085 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, which is pretty average.
Run of the mill. I would say that's the epitome of like a 15th, 16th ranked quarterback, maybe lower.
Yeah, because like how many in a 16-game season, that was 10 games, like how many touchdowns would he be on pace for? Like 25?
He'd be on pace for like 20 touchdowns, 15 picks.
Yeah, which is not great. And then I'm going through these games too, and 5 of them he didn't throw a touchdown. 2 of them he threw 2 touchdowns, which is like okay. Like you really want your quarterback thriving at throwing like 3 touchdowns pretty regularly, I feel like. And then he had a game with 4 touchdowns and then 2 games with 3 touchdowns.
So some of those numbers are a little inflated, it seems, as well.
Yeah, because half of them, he didn't even throw a touchdown. He has a game with Philadelphia where he had a 50% completion percentage. He has actually 3 games in here where he threw under 60%.
Yeah, that's telling for sure. And that's including the Amari Coopers of the world, the Michael Gallups of the world, the CeeDee Lambs of the world, Dalton Schultz. This is with great weapons. This is with one of the best O-lines in football as well.
Yeah.
Holding the bearing. And it's not like they've had like terrible backups to Zeke this whole time too.
Yeah.
So even just without a Zeke Elliott, who's obviously a great running back, one of the best running backs of the decade, but that's telling. So for the Cowboys, do you see them making a move for somebody? Should they do that? Do you trust Tony Pollard?
Yeah, Tony Pollard for me is like the definition of like, yeah, he's good. Like, I don't think like everyone's like, oh yeah, he's like Alvin Kamara. I'm like, he's like a poor man's Alvin Kamara. And I don't want to bash on the guy because I think he's a really good player. But is he that Super Bowl caliber running back that you'll be able to rely on game in and game out? Not really. I don't think he's a guy you should really just hand over the keys of your franchise to. So if I'm the Cowboys and if we want to go in all in this year and really make a push for it, you bite the salary bullet, you go out there and you get Jonathan Taylor. Ooh. Because Dak Prescott is great and at his best when he has a dynamic running game. The offensive line is starting to regress a little bit because everyone's getting older. We've been talking about how good this O-line is since Tony Romo and DeMarco Murray.
Yeah.
That's how long we've been like, oh, the Dallas Cowboys offensive line is great. Like, well, it's coming to a head. Got a little bit worse last year. And then Zeke still had a pretty good season last year, had 12 rushing touchdowns and rushed for about 800 yards along with Tony Pollard there. So it's like, go out there, get an elite running back, and then you'll have a tandem of him and CeeDee Lamb. And then that'll make Dak more dynamic because if you're going to rely on him consistently throwing guys open, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen that time and time again with him. As far as pairing him with Tony Pollard, you mentioned, really, really good running back. I'm bigger on him than you are, but he reminds me more of someone like, and this is another guy who I really like a lot, and I think he's better, but someone like Travis Etienne, where he's a really solid running back. He's a good pass catching back, and he's elusive. That's what I like about him. But for someone like Etienne and someone like Pollard, you want someone to pair with him, you know?
Yeah.
We saw the Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb experiment in Cleveland be very successful, and I feel like that's what Jacksonville was doing with Tank Bigsby this year. But for the Cowboys, you don't really have that big physical running back. They drafted Deuce Vaughn, who's smaller than Tony Pollard, who's a lot more of a, nifty, kind of similar play style to Tony Pollard. Get someone like Jonathan Taylor in there, one of the best running backs in football. You pair him with Tony Pollard. Now we're talking a different story there.
Yeah, you're definitely talking a different story. And it would make sense because Mike McCarthy is also like, hey, I want to move off the stack throwing and pushing the ball down the field, which is why they let Kellen Moore walk. And then they brought in Brian Schottenheimer. Yeah, to be the offensive coordinator. So with Dak, it's like not only was he helped by Kellen Moore, like boosting up his numbers, wanting to throw more than he ran it, because like I always felt Dallas would get into a pretty good rhythm running the football, and then they were really good at running and in a rhythm versus certain teams, and then Kellen Moore would just go away from that and start throwing, which lost them a few critical moments. Yeah. And then we're going more consistently running the football. So you need guys who can actually help that because I'm like, if we're gonna move on from Zeke, we need a running back stable if Mike McCarthy is trying to reel him back. And then we also have a offensive coordinator who's not a bad coordinator, but he's not great either. I know Russell Wilson didn't really ever love him when he was in Seattle.
Yeah, I think Brian Schottenheimer, if you're talking about polar opposites for offensive coordinators, you're talking about Kellen Moore, who's more of a pass-heavy guy. That's why I think he's going to be a great fit for the Chargers. Brian Schottenheimer, he's a lot better for conservative check downs, run the football, drain the clock kind of quarterback whisperer here. So I think with this offense, you're going to rely a lot more heavily on your running backs and your tight ends. So for them, they drafted a tight end. Obviously, we know Dalton Schultz moved on to Houston, drafted a tight end in the second round. He looks like he's going to be pretty good, Jake Ferguson. And you get Jonathan Taylor there, it's pairing with Tony Pollard, and you still have CeeDee Lamb. I'm relatively nervous, but I do think that their offense will still be successful. But I think they should make a move. I think they should get another weapon for him.